right there that are causing the differences between those individuals. What you noticed that she's aware of in her out-of-craft task is that there are some people that seem to, not in her out-of-craft task, but previous out-of-craft task, some people seem to be so only concerned with themselves. They seem to, their conduct and their actions and all, they are thinking only selfishly. They don't really think of the repercussions of how it might affect others. They think only of, is it what I want to do? Is it ahead for me? And so forth, where others seem to have a sense of fairness and think of what maybe the good for everyone concerned is, and they might be putting that over their selfish thoughts. Okay, and now we said we could expand on that a little bit. Stanley? Well, why do you think that some seem to be able to think in terms of fairness and think of the overall picture and realize that they may not know it all? And why do they think that way while others seem to think, well, why should I be concerned about that? I'm only concerned with where I'm going and where the world around me revolves. I'm not really. What causes this? These to have that difference? Did some of them get more potassium and some of them got too much calcium, or what caused that? Melody?
Okay, do you think it was because they didn't know how to do that? In other words, is it because they perhaps were taught they didn't know how to handle a circumstance like that, and because of what, let's say, was in their genes or what was in their personal lives, the individuals they were with, grew up with, so to speak, the way they were taught. They were not taught the proper way to handle circumstances like that. Does that sound like that's what it is? In other words, they're up against the wall and the only thing they can do is get mad and turn around and walk off because they don't know how to handle it.
Because they were never really taught of the alternatives to
right.
that.
Now, there's one thing I'd like to add what Stan Modi said. I think he was on to something that he got because he said there are individuals who are aware that they can't do something, right?
That they don't know it all.
That they don't know it all. There are also individuals who think they know everything and that their way is the way, and consequently it's a little bit overconfident instead of examining whether or not my way, what is your way, and I'll share with you my way, and we'll come up with the right answer. That's a very strong characteristic that humans have. And what Melody said is an extremely strong characteristic. People don't know how to handle things, and very rarely do you find a human who has been taught by a parent how to handle a circumstance without, in the proper way. Erase that without. I don't mean to put the without in. In other words, very few have been taught how to handle something in the most proper way. Okay, so Roddy?
Now, please talk up because we'd like to be able to hear things on the tape.
In other words, they only have their own thoughts in mind and not really care about what you're saying or thinking about. So far, we've kept out quite a few people from going to Houston.
Well, and we're still, I've got a lot of ideas on this topic that I'm staying back on. I don't want to mention because I'd like to see if what we've taught you would, if you can come forward with things that we would say about this topic.
That is also a very good one. All of them so far have been very good.
Before we leave this one that's really mentioned, people don't know automatically how to listen. I mean, they have to be taught the value of listening, and they have to be taught by example of seeing other people listen. And like if they see you listening, and they see because of the way you say, goodness, had I not listened, I wouldn't have known this. In other words, if they observe that circumstance, then they begin to think, maybe I should consider once in a while listening. You see what I'm saying? Because they may be thrown in circumstances, both it might be in their genes, both and in the environment that they've had in this lifetime, where they were in a household where no one listened to each other. They all talked at the same time, and they went and just did, and it was kind of the accepted way that you were almost didn't have self-confidence if you listened much to someone else. You see what we're saying? Because people think, if I have self-confidence, I don't particularly need to learn from you, because they haven't really learned the value. They still think that. Now, I don't want to get into areas that are areas we would cover on this topic. We would rather let you feed them to us. Why did they do that? Well, they've been taught to blame someone else. They've been taught over generations to blame someone else. They don't even know they're blaming someone else. I mean, even your classmates have to deal with that. They automatically find it very difficult to see that it was their own mistake. They find it a lot easier to see, well, if it is my mistake, it's only because of what you did.
Well, some people say don't ever admit that. That's one of the things that you're taught. Never admit that you've done something wrong. Okay, that's good. Alex, sorry? Well, in
Well,
a way,
it's the same thing. It's the same thing. They just haven't labeled it the way you've labeled it. But they have the respect. You may label it pleasing and cheap. You don't really even know. So you're so blinded by the vehicle that you're wearing, and it's not Auxiliary, it's the whole class. All of us, we're so blinded. We don't even know what pleasing or cheap is. We would like to think that we are doing something because but we really don't. We really don't do even right actions with that motivation in mind. We do right actions because it's something that we sense because of what we've been taught. In other words, as you've been taught that and you can see the reason why. I mean, as you've been taught something, and as you have observed the reasoning behind what you've been taught, then you program yourself to recognize that this is a more right action, and this is a more right action, and this is a more right action. And so then there's something in you that wants to constantly do the more right action. Now, at a lower level, what you're saying, for anyone outside that door, that same item exists in them in degrees, even though it may be a very tiny degree. But you want to assume that it is not a tiny degree. You want to assume that it is a degree sufficient to stimulate right direction. In other words, we're not interested in pointing out what might happen to those who self-destruct because of not choosing the positive. We're only interested in talking about the positive because we don't want to plant thoughts of giving up. It's just like you all still have to ward off giving up when negativity tries to fill you. But there is something in every human that really, if he wants to, he will dig down and realize that there's some more right way to do this. There's some better way to do this than the way I'm doing it. And you'd find that characteristic present in every individual to a degree. And what you're trying to do, or what we hope to do when we leave, is stimulate that little characteristic in there enough that it will start developing better. But you know, when does this come out in humans, this little characteristic? It usually comes out when some tragedy occurs in their life, when they lose the person closest to them, or when they
things are going back so well.
Yes, or their closest person to them almost died but didn't. And so they suddenly say, I'm going to change my life completely because God stepped in and prevented Susie from losing her life. And Susie was the most precious thing to me. Or you see what we're saying? It takes some reason like that to trigger their hunting for that little percentage of lessons that are in their genes that make them want to look for more rightness. But there's still some more significant reasons that you haven't touched on why the masses seem to be, or a large percentage of people at this particular time in their development, seem to be unconcerned for the right action for the group as a whole, and more concerned for themselves. Back to Junodi's topic. Answer? Well,
let me interrupt you. It tells them not to clean up right now. Recognize it.
we just wanted to get something in Desto to tell me and forget the cleanup until after we're gone.
Would you say that discipline, be willing to learn discipline? Is that what you're talking about, control? Because control could cover a lot of things, you know. So being willing to be disciplined, no matter what kind of circumstances would be given to them. In other words, if they want to, if the next level, if they were sent to Houston, they would have to be willing to be disciplined in every way, whatever was presented to them. The willingness to be disciplined.
Well, yes, but I think you've almost jumped from a first grade question to a fourth grade question. You've almost jumped from something selfishness against thinking of others to a different topic, which is one of control, which is certainly a major topic. But we haven't gotten to the crux of why certain individuals think only selfishly, and why other individuals are more concerned with fairness and how their actions might affect others. And there's a very strong movement afoot, to give you a clue, that separates the two.
And Dodie, do you?
They can't. They won't until they. It's like if you can tell me that it's going to hurt my head if I don't pick up my foot and don't trip over that curb. But I don't really learn the lesson. I compute it, and it goes in my computer. But the imprint is very pale, very weak, until I trip on that curb and hit my head, and it seriously hurts. And then I learn the lesson. Now, but there's a
that can go into the fourth grade.
Yeah, that's something else.
Okay.
But there's still some reasons why there is this going on. Kadoti?
But why? What is this thing? Patricia?
Okay. You're talking about that the ones who are thinking more selfishly, it might be because of poor nutrition of the vehicle. Well, that's altogether possible, and it has something to do with it. But there's still a major reason why these vehicles, because you will find a world of humans out there that are have chosen a very, very selfish lifestyle. Why have they chosen a very selfish lifestyle? And it's not just because they might be unhealthy. It's true. They are unhealthy. That is a contributing factor. But there's also something that has been a stronger lure that has caused them to Well, let's go a little further. You're saying that maybe because it might be the influence of the negative forces, or Lucifer and his friends, that people are looking more for satisfaction. But did that? Why? Why is it that way? Did they just choose individually to do that? Glenody? Well, I'm gonna give away one thing that's very strong in my feeling on this, rather than just pumpy part along, because maybe we can go into other things, and then T might want to express some that she's holding back on. But I feel that one characteristic that I'm afraid now how to approach it with humans, because you've got to be very careful when you're talking to humans about lower forces, and that they've listened to Lucifer, because they immediately see you as on some religious kick. But now that we're for this part of our little conversation, we're talking more in class, because we would have to handle that if it went out, and at this point of the game, we'd have to handle it in other terms. And the way I would handle it, even though I'm aware that where this came from was the Lucifer forces, anytime the next level, now this is in class talk for a minute, because anytime the next level sends members to do a task, then it immediately stirs up all the lower forces to work in opposition, because ultimately what the lower forces would like to do is continue to preserve the human beings as slaves for their own efforts, and to hold them into the vibrations of what would keep them undeveloped, would keep them more animal. One of the characteristics that the lower forces uses that hides very neatly is in trends. Trends. And in other words, somebody writes a book who is a very good instrument of those forces, and the trend says number one is me. How many times since you have been students did you hear on TV or see on book material or anything else that I am number one, meaning nothing really counts as much as me? And it became an almost tidal wave trend. It's like when each year there's a fashion of clothing that the market tries to sell, because they all want to make a good living, and the only way they can make a good living off of you is to sell you on the idea that these clothes are in fashion and that last year's are out, and that's the only way they're going to make a good living, is to convince you that the ideas they're promoting this year are in, and that what they promoted last year or the year before is quickly fading. Now, the only way the vibrations of this planet, or the lower forces of this planet, can convince you, or can get you to strengthen them, is to make you feel like it is in to put you first. And they even did it by making you think that you had no self-confidence if you didn't put me number one. That that you were almost nothing. You were almost just, in other words, they made it look backwards, as if the ones who put number one first will be the ones who move ahead, and the ones who don't just fall in the stream. Do you see what we're saying? And yet what was actually happening was they were creating a stream, and the stream was titled Me Number One, and nobody else really counts. Look out for self. Now, you all were not as exposed to this as much during this period, because when this trend became very, very strong was just about the time that you were extracting yourself from being exposed to those trends. But this trend is extremely strong, and people have joined on the bandwagon of it more than they have tennis shoes. Now, I'm not exaggerating. They have really gotten on the wagon of feeling like the in thing is to put number one first. Look out for self first. And the guy who's really good at it, who can do it and yet not have you aware that he's doing it. The person that is really good at it is the one who can keep his interests first and can be totally selfish in all of his pursuits, but not let you know that that's what he's doing, but make you think that he's also concerned for your feelings, and he's a nice guy, and he's, has learned the tact of being smooth. But those side characteristics came through pretty weak in the trend. So weak that a lot of people don't really care whether you see them as being totally selfish. They don't really care. It's like you're some kind of goody-goody if you don't just let me simply go where I'm trying to go by being number one.
See, that's the way society teaches me.
That's the way they have jumped on this bandwagon.
This is the way it's supposed to be, and if you're not that way, then you don't fit.
Okay, it was a disease.
But in Houston, it's not going to be that way.
That's right.
Okay?
They can't go to Houston, and all of those in Houston who are practicing that are going to have to be extracted and transplanted and out, because this is a very, very contagious disease. Do you realize that it's a very contagious disease?
A lot of branches, because but anyway, okay, shall we take some more of your?
Sure.
Okay, more of your President. What are the lower forces, President? But see, what is negative can be, they might see it as a positive. In other words, all these things are the negative. If they were positive, they could all go to Houston. In other words, when you're talking to the next level, you're going to have to tell them precisely what they mean. They know the lower forces causes all the bad habits. Anything that is, that's right, anything that isn't good, our next level standards belong to the lower forces. So you have to think in more detail in that way, okay?
John, one more thing I want to say on that topic, and then I'll get off that little box. But because if I had given the answer that you noted, or if the thought had entered my mind that entered you notice about selfishness against concern for others, the first thought that came to my mind was that that the lower forces have unleashed a terrible disease, and the disease is to get on the bandwagon of promoting self and let anything else, let the chips fall where they will in the process. And to me, the humans need to recognize that the bandwagon is not, does not get you where you want to go. Now, because they say, like if you said, well, it's negativity, some fella who, let's say, has used the selfish philosophy, and in a matter of 2 or 3 years it's made him a millionaire, he's going to say, you talk about negativity? I got what I wanted. Do you see what I'm saying? I didn't care who I stepped on in the process. I got what I wanted. I have what I want. So what are you going to do to him? How are you going to deal with someone who has made a positive of what you see as a negative?
You won't be confused.
So Dallas is going to have all the wealth?
Well, isn't it, in other words, this is a key there. I mean, people have got, you all come up with, Doug just gave you a key right there, where the values, the sense of values that people have now. Go ahead, but you all give us,
Yes. Let me throw in something. When T said what she did, we watched a little news thing the other day where this high school teacher was so astonished at what was the conversation among high school students. Now, what the going thing was, how quickly can I get ahead? I mean, high school students were becoming preoccupied with getting rich quick. And when you all were high school students, you couldn't have cared less about money, except from mom and dad to keep sending the checks so you could spend it. And they all thought that, your folks all thought that you were not practical. You were unrealistic because all you did was spend it. You never thought anything about making it. Now, there is a trend now where these very, very young people, they said 12 and 13-year-olds are preoccupied with how can I get to where the market is.
And they talk with a sense of pride about their child talking in that way. Okay? So, what do we have to leave out here? Dorothy? See, they don't know. They don't know what you're talking about. No, there's no way you can say lack of understanding or more intellectual when they might have their PhD. That's pretty intellectual to have a PhD, a doctor before your name. They might be an MD, and they might know every vein and vessel, corpuscle, every organ in the body. That's pretty intellectual. But in other words, you can say they have they need to have a thirst. No, let's say that you need to say that they've got to be aware that they don't know as much as they think they know. This goes back in a sense to what Stamodi said. Even though you have a PhD, even though you might graduate from high school or elementary school or anything, you don't know as much as you think you know, because there's always something more to learn. There's no end to it. You can always improve upon it. But what you've got to think now is more in detail, because you can say, well, they've got to be better humans. or have better conduct. In what way? Do you follow what we're saying? So it has to be. Go ahead. Well,
you know what just registered in my brain? I'm playing the part of a human. And if you said that to me, I'd say, what denomination are you a part of?
What church?
Yeah,
I go to church.
What's your church?
I go to church on Sunday. I pay 10% of what I make every month to the church. And anytime somebody asks me to give to the United Fund, I gladly give. And if I see somebody on the street with no legs and they're holding out a tin cup, I drop 25 cents in. Now, that's goodness to them.
And if you talk, you've got to have more knowledge than ignorance. They think in terms of, like T said, education. Actually,
goodness is a combination of all of these things that we're talking about. You understand? Being able to go to Houston with all these good characteristics, with the ability to do these things, or the willingness to want to do it. What we have to do is make people realize that they don't even know what goodness is, because it's limited to whatever they were involved in the world. Let's take what Melody brought up about people getting angry or hurt. They don't know how to do any better. And so people don't know how to do any better. Even the most refined individual, let's say the President of the United States, is not the most refined, but he has the highest office in the United States, actually in the whole world. And yet he wants to take the criminal and make it harder for him in jail.
Wants to concentrate more on punishment.
Punishing them more in jail. Now that is the man who has the highest office in the United States. In the world. He wants to make it worse for them. Now he doesn't know any better. It doesn't dawn on him that the way to improve upon somebody is not to punish them, but to teach them a better way. The people do not know any better way, or they would not be continuing to work as a criminal. So here you have an individual who can, all he needs to do is say those words, and people will do it. And the poor criminal is sitting there wondering, I don't know any other way. How can I be any better? I don't know any other way.
Well, why should I be? It didn't get me anywhere last time I tried to be. My grandma threw the frying pan in my face when I tried to be decent to her.
There's a book out now that's called The Shoemaker. And I started reading it. And it's a true story about a man who committed murders and brutal murders. It was so bad, I couldn't even finish reading the book. I threw it away. I mean, you can't imagine what this man did. Plus, he taught his children how to do it. I mean, I'll give you an example of how bad it was. He and his son, this man and his son, took a 9-year-old boy who was riding his bicycle out, just standing around watching kids at a park, and asked him to go with them to do it, to move some things, and that they would pay him. Now this is a true story. And they took this little boy, 9-year-old boy, didn't really want to, but they talked him into it. He said, well, okay, but I've got to get home because my parents are waiting for me, and I'll get in trouble if I'm too long. They said, it won't take you very long. So they took him into a storehouse, and they took some some clippers that they used to cut leather with, and they stuck it up his rectum and just cut him to pieces, mutilated his body, and delighted in doing it. And that little kid was alive when they started doing it. And now, doesn't that make you sick to think that there are minds like that can think of doing something like that?
And genes that have become like that, where vehicles find pleasure in killing,
this man who was the father of the son, who was doing these things to this little 9-year-old kid, when he was growing up, he was treated very badly himself. When he would do something wrong, his parents, not one but both of them, would hold his hand over an open flame on the stove and burn him until he cried with pain and promised that he wouldn't do it again. Now, this was something that was in the genes. He thought he was taught to punish, and according to the his parents, they thought they had been punished like that when they were younger, and they thought that was the way. But the progression, what was so bad, they didn't do anything to him like what they did to this young boy. Now, this is a true story. It was written by a psychiatrist. But in my mind, that was so brutal, I didn't even want to hear about it, and I threw it in the garbage because all it's going to do is teach somebody else something to do.
Or stimulate the genes that might be in their own vehicles where some of those characteristics were present.
Now, this is what you, in a sense, you've got to be aware that there is a lot of badness, and the badness can be changed by raising a child up in a better way. But they've got to know a better way.
Badness meaning sickness,
Right.
because it's sick. You know, so oftentimes these who are child abusers were abused as child. That 90% of them were, or a greater percent, I don't know than that, but they were. In other words, it goes on generations, and it becomes such an impressive the event in your genes. Let's say that your grandparent was abused as a child. The experience was so traumatic that it made such a strong impression that it's almost like looking for a drug. Do you understand that? It's almost like looking for a rare drug because of the sheer excitement of that trauma. Do you understand that? But you don't know that you're looking for it. But when, let's say, a couple of generations later, in a loss of temper, an offspring of that child abuser abuses their own child because that action came out in that unrestrained moment, because it was in the genes, and it was almost had its excitement because the impression was so strong. It was almost like an unconscious way of looking for that same degree of excitement. Now, you can say excitement. Yes, all trauma is excitement. Join the trend of a lot of promiscuity and sexual activity really become hooked on the drug that is lit. Now, I'm not talking symbolically drug. I'm talking chemistry. Because when the vehicle is engaged in the sensuous activity, it lets off a drug. It is a high. It's the same kind of high, but it's a chemical drug that can be self-imposed instead of having to go get a slug of cocaine or something else. And that's why the more you participate in that drug, the more drug the vehicle wants, because it has felt the high of that drug. You all know that the experience has a moment of almost unconscious euphoria, very similar to the same thing you would experience under heroin or an extreme dose of heroin, though the time expansion might be different. Do you follow what we're saying? So eventually, men of medicine are going to have to recognize that instead, well, there was another aspect here that I wanted to share with you and I lost it. But it's like if I give you a shot of a drug for something, that if you get hooked on the shot, you're going to want the shot even when you don't have the ailment. Do you see what we're saying? And in a sense, the drug of sex was for offspring. Do you see what we're saying? But offspring gets out of the picture, and the trend is to master all the things to protect you from offspring. To master all the child, what do they call them? Pills? The what? Well, yes, but what do they call it? Birth control pills. It's like every method of birth control pill. They've got pills for the males now. They've got, literally, they do. They've got every imaginable aspect.
They've even legalized killing the babies once they start.
Yes. And they have even promoted the drug. Do you see what we're saying? It's now, and the lower forces have promoted the drug, that it's the drug that you're after. Even though the next level says, boy, the only way I can fight that is to throw in more and more gonorrhea and more syphilis, more AIDS, more everything I can think of, herpes. And I'm going to have to create I'm going to have to throw in such strong ones that the diseases I throw in will quickly become immune to everything that you can fight them off with. Or if you learn to fight, if the humans learn to fight them off, then I'm going to have to introduce something stronger that they can't fight off. Do you see what we're saying? And of course, this is just the progression. But don't forget, the period of the time that you're here is not a normal period. In other words, if you weren't here, if we weren't here, you weren't here, if the next level had not sent us, things would be going much, much better for the world, because they wouldn't have to battle against the purpose of our being here. Do you follow that? So don't you understand why in your grandmother's generation why niceness reigned? Do you follow why that courtesy reigned? Thought for others reigned. Restraint was pretty much a rule to a degree. Do you follow what we're saying? But now, the closer you came in with a task to do, the more the trend was zero restraint. Do you know that the young people out there don't care if they get gonorrhea once a week? I mean, a new case. They don't care. It's as much going in for the penicillin shots to get rid of the gonorrhea as it is to take aspirin for a headache. I mean, it doesn't matter. it has become just the course of things to constantly get your little checkups so that you can still be free as you want to in your physical relationships with others. But now, of course, this is going to have to be a subject that we'll cover because it's a major one, this lack of restraint and these drugs. And excuse me, you started to say something?
I was just going to say, so they can't go to Houston if they have no restraint in that place.
And that gets back to, see, we've skipped, and I'm guilty of it. We skipped from some first and second grades way up to some 11th and
So that's
12th
something
grade.
you can't bring in at the very beginning. But they can become more refined in their relationship. Okay? What are some more things? Start running?
Better what?
Actually, I think leadership is good, but what they have to do is stop being such followers.
Yes.
In other words, they have to become leaders themselves instead of looking to somebody else, because that's where the trends come in.
It's
See,
true.
They look toward people setting trends so that they can be. Look at Michael Jackson, for instance. People, it's unbelievable. And what has he got to offer them? Other than to wear a white glove on one of his hands, a sequined glove, and
Jerk and twitch and sing in little high voice.
which there's nothing wrong with it. But the fact of it is if they weren't looking for leaders, they wouldn't be looking to him.
They're really looking for idols. They're looking for somebody to put on a pedestal. And anybody who has an organization behind them to give them a good strong pedestal, they all jump on that bandwagon, particularly if the market has planned the strategy of selling that product. In other words, the Jackson thing was a highly planned, marketable item. It wasn't something that just happened. A lot of effort went into it with promoters and money, and people are making money off of that have nothing to do with music or singing or teenage idols. Do you know that? And they will pour money into what he's doing to spotlight him in order to get their money from the side items of it.
So what you, in a sense, what people need to do, they want to become leaders themselves, not
just part of the mainstream.
Not look to others, but to want to be a leader,
Right.
but not the leader of everybody, but realize that they need to have that characteristic of leadership in order to be amongst the other leaders. They're all
Right.
leaders.
They've got to be willing to start some new little streams. You know what we're saying? Instead of everybody going with the main river. You know what? Like the Mississippi flows and it's big, and it's the main river. So everybody takes a boat and goes to get on the Mississippi, and they flow with the tide and they go down the river. Instead of it takes a great deal of effort to start a stream. In fact, you have to dig a trench. You know, you have to dig a trench, then you have to wait for it to rain, and you have to see where your trench didn't work. And you have to, there's a lot of work that takes in starting a new stream. The other night, this fellow from the Libertarian Party was on, and I listened to him for, I guess, an hour, and I thought, goodness, he is miles ahead of the masses. Not that everything he said was right, but if you took the package as a whole, it was 300% better than what the Democratic Party or the Republican Party could offer the nation. But I was also aware that the nation wasn't ready for it. that it was extremely ahead of its time, that they couldn't implement it even if he won. They aren't willing to implement it because they don't want to think that way. Do you understand what we're saying? But here's a little guy and a little group of people called the Libertarian Party who were willing to go against the mainstream and start some streams. It doesn't mean their stream is pure, because it's all stepwise motion toward getting better. But I felt like, oh, if I could throw him a bouquet of roses, or give him
I'll let him go.
you know, yeah, he can go to Houston.
Okay, get somebody over here. Dora?
Well, kind of the other side of the coin of for individuals blaming others. We've had one not taking credit, not having the ego come in the way of needing to take credit for things, but to learn to make others look good. And that's part of learning to work together. What we were talking about before, things. And I think a lot of people don't think that way. They need to learn how to not need to take credit.
In other words, to kind of work, be willing to do work without the thought of receiving an award or credit.
What do I get out of it?
The task itself.
Right. Okay. Good, Mary?
Okay. Let me back you up just one step, because you said that it might just be a nutritional deficiency. It's never just a nutritional deficiency, because don't forget the deficiency was probably there a couple of generations prior to that, and those genes aren't going to get enough B complex, even if you took an overdose for 16 years. If that deficiency was there for some time, even though you would be working against it, but it would take all the big complex you could get, plus you're being aware that it was a weakness genetically that you have to work against, and you have to have the willingness to work against that natural response that your vehicle has because of that poor nutrition that has yielded this kind of conduct. Do you see what I'm saying? But I think a lot of times we wish, that we could give some a little bit of this supplement or that one, and it would correct everything that has been breeding there for generations. And it can't do it. It hardly makes a dent, but it subsides a little bit. It helps. It assists you a little bit in your effort of control. But that's all you can expect of it in such a short time. Well, that's good.
They know how. They just don't. A lot of that is just talk. In other words,
Say they want to, but don't want to
people-
bad enough to do anything about it.
people like to talk, and which I'm only adding to what you're saying. It's true they don't know how to change, but if they see somebody doing something that they think is admirable, then they can change because it is being pointed out to them, a characteristic that is good. Now, do y'all understand that? If you see somebody doing something good, you can copy them because the vehicle is made to, the human vehicle is made to copy. It's when you don't know something that you're limited. But once you see somebody do something good, that
If you can recognize it as good, then, boy, you've got a great opportunity to start copycatting.
If you see somebody, let's say the two individuals that Rhodey was talking about, saw somebody let's say use smoking because smoking is the most important thing now that people are working on. And these two individuals overheard somebody say that I gave up smoking. And they overheard how they did it. And then that person who was listening to the conversation said, oh, I wish I could do that. I wish I was strong enough. Really and truly, they don't really wish that they could do it. If they did, they would do it. So all it is just talk. And
they don't want to be seen as a complete rebel.
Right.
They
so they will say, I wish I could be that strong, but I just can't. I've tried it, but I just can't do it, which is a bunch of malarkey. So what humans have got to learn to do is to stop talking and being more truthful. And instead of realizing that they can do anything they want to do. And to not say, I wish I could do that. I wish I could be like Junior over there. He can do this and do that. But I just can't.
Now, she's not saying they can do it overnight.
Oh, no.
But she's saying that if you really wanted to do it, you could start on it, even if you happen to make very little progress in the amount of time you had left in that lifetime. But if all the people that you came in contact with saw you working on that thing, and the people, your offspring and so forth, wouldn't be long till those genes would be turned around. Wouldn't take. It would take just about as long as it took to get into it.
It's just like with you all. If you all say that I want to be, as a member of the next level, I want to do everything that I'm supposed to do, and you really and you firmly believe it, then you will be able to do it. But it doesn't mean that you will not be tested. Because you all know that an hour doesn't go by in a day, I believe, that you are not tested. But the fact of it is you're still trying. You're still trying to do what will help you to become a conscious member of the next level. Conscious, I mean by that, your mind, you have a mind of the next level, but your vehicle doesn't know that your mind, know what your mind knows. You follow that? So that's what I mean by a conscious member. But every time that you become aware of something that you do that is not characteristic of a member of the next level, makes you a stronger member of the next level, even if you give into it. Can you understand that? Because if you give into it, you are aware that you gave into it. If you weren't working toward becoming a member of the next level, and you would not have even become aware of it. It would have
You
flown-
wouldn't have even seen it
you
as
wouldn't have
something you
even
gave
known.
into.
You wouldn't have even known that you gave into it, because it would have happened without any thought. So, but a human doesn't know what to strive for. He only knows what Michael Jackson might do, or what Dr. Brothers, the psychologist, might do, or President Reagan might do, or their school teacher might do, whoever they happen to be looking up to at that time. And it may be the worst thing in the world. The teacher may be a Fagin. You know what I mean by a Fagin? A teacher of the pickpockets. And that teacher might be telling Tom and Jerry and Doris that this is the way to make a living. You go and pick people's pockets and bring the money to me, and I will give you your share. And that's the way that they are being taught. And so therefore, the humans have got to know a way, just like you are teaching your vehicle, a way of making your vehicle in a condition where your mind can come through and be in control of the vehicle. Now, I'm not talking about the humans having a mind, next level mind. I'm talking about our teaching them characteristics that are more refined than what they know now, so they can all go to Houston. Okay? They're voting? No more than what they want. Right.
But this has now. This is something that has gotten extremely worse since you started on your endeavor. Just like these other lack of restraints has gotten worse. Don't know if you all know what Livwood is talking about, but it's like when we were trying to get things done on this house, and you'd hire somebody to do the floor, you'd hire a painter to come in, or you'd hire somebody to fix the pool, you'd hire somebody. They will tell you that they'll do it, and they have learned how to say, I'll be there next Tuesday. You know, like Mulligan is always going to take care of something on next Tuesday. And they have no intention of doing it on Tuesday. They even know when they say it, that if you'll buy it, then they're covered till Tuesday, and they'll worry about Tuesday when it gets here. Do you see what we're saying? And there is a very, very strong disease of people not being of their word and getting by with the least they can get by with as far as performance is concerned. This paper hanger who came over here, he said, you know, I lose a lot of jobs because I don't take jobs that I know I can't do. He said, I know all the other paper hangers get more jobs because they take jobs whether they can do them or not. In other words, they will accept jobs hoping that they can work them in. But they're afraid to not take all those jobs, even jobs they know they don't have time to do, because they're afraid that if they should lose some, that there'll be days when they won't be making money. So they'll take many times more jobs than they can possibly do to ensure their days, with no care for losing their reputation over all the jobs they said they'd do that they couldn't get around to. And so then they learn a game of how they can cover themselves and tell people, well, I'll get to you. The paper didn't come in. Or, you know, I went over there and you weren't there. The door was locked. You know, they learn every thing you can say. We couldn't tell how many times we could tell you that we caught people saying, I went over there yesterday evening and there was nobody getting in. We'd say, I'm sorry, we were there yesterday evening. And they think, got caught there, you know. But they
must have got the wrong
house. Yes, they've got an answer. That's it. Must have got the wrong house. You know, or wasn't it, 3428 Elmridge? Wasn't it? Yes. They're non-existent. Get it? My wife wrote that down wrong. They've got an answer for everything to cover themselves, and they don't care how dishonest they are in the process.
Okay, that's a good thing. Okay, what else? Jimmy?
You're absolutely right. It's related to the same thing. You know that they don't really care. Most of them don't care. It's the minority that cares. There is such a strong disease of people who are taking jobs as house painters who have never held a paintbrush in their hand and yet are out to sell people on painting their houses and charging astronomical prices. And there even is a movement of people who all they're after, in other words, they have a little game set up because they tell you, pay them a third when you contract them. Pay them the second third the day they start to work. And pay the last third when they complete it to your satisfaction. Do you know that they capitalize on that? And they take your third and you never see them again. In other words, a lot of people have learned I can get my third by contracting with you. If I can sell you on my doing the job, in other words, I'll underbid the guy who bid $1,200 over here to do something. I'll bid $800, and at least I'll get that third, and you'll never see me again. And I don't care. I won't disappear so you can send the police out after me. I'll just have reasons why I could never get back around to do the job, and you're the one that will be the fault of the contract going back because you hired somebody else. Do you see what I'm saying? You're the one that broke the contract. You hired somebody else. You didn't have a thing on the contract that I had to start by the 13th or lose my money. And since you hired somebody else, I don't owe you anything.
But that is a good thing. It doesn't, if somebody, like using an example that Doe gave about somebody who has never held a paintbrush in their hand and will charge an enormous fee to paint someone's house. If they have a book to learn how to paint a house and they study it and then try to paint a house, that's a lot better in my mind because they're exerting the effort to learn how to do it right. Now, it doesn't mean that people who know nothing about something, if they want to try to learn something about it in the process of doing a task, like some of the people in computers. They knew nothing about computers before they started out. But they have worked hard to learn how, and they've asked questions, and they've tried to know what they know and let others know what they don't know, and so that they will not overstep themselves.
And we tried to tell you all as you went out to look for tasks not to oversell yourself.
Right.
Not to say that you could do more than you could do, because you're falling into a thing that humans do. They oversell and then think, well, while they're not watching, I'll catch up. You know, they won't ever know the difference, because by the time that they're examining my work, I will be able to produce what I said I could produce. But that's not honest. That's not right. I mean, if somebody's taking a manual on painting a house, there should be no embarrassment in his saying, I think I've got one of the best manuals, don't you think so, on painting this house? And I'll be willing to paint your house for a very reasonable price if you'll give me the time to do it, because I'm going to learn to be the best painter. Now, I would like to hire somebody. I don't care if he's never painted a house. What I care is for him to come and tell me he's painted all over town, and that he can do it like that at an enormous fee, and that's all dishonest. I mean, you wouldn't care getting somebody to do something if you knew at the outset they didn't know what they were doing, but they were going to learn, and they were asking you for the opportunity to learn. Now, there might be some things that you don't want a learner on, that you want the task of somebody experienced.
Things that might explode, or your television set, or something like that. But anyway, that's a good characteristic, aren't they?
Recently, I've had occasion to go to people's on-site, and they become so familiar with me right off the bat that this announcement, even to the point of making explicit comments about the secretary or the people that go around the track down there. Some they were nice sometimes, and it just really blows a circuit to my brain to hear them carry on
Too
the
free
way
to
they're so
express.
free to express
With
their-
anyone.
with anyone their illicit thoughts.
Right.
Well, see, but it's the trend to have
be
no
that way.
restraint with those kind of thoughts. When T and I were at downtown at this place of business, some of the men were I don't know if they were. I think they just didn't care the fact that we were strangers, but they were people who were at this place of business every day, and there was glass across the front of the building, and it was in a downtown area, and it was get off work time, and these females were walking across the building on the way to the parking lot. But this particular place where we were in didn't get off at the time that their doors stayed open 30 minutes later or something. So one of the men immediately yells to all the other men, we were present, no telling who all else was present, but this is a real 10. Yell to all of the others, hey, this is a real 10. And they all run up to the front of the window where these are grown men in suits and ranging everywhere from very gray hair to not so gray hair. And they're all standing up there at the window where those females, as they walk by, can see them all standing there with their tongues out as they watch them go by. And they talked as they walked about every part of their anatomy.
A 10's supposed to be the perfect female, okay? There was some movie that came out a couple of years ago that was just the letters 10. And the girl who played in the movie was the perfect female.
It was like on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 is the perfect female vehicle.
But whose mind,
But what looked so funny to T and Doe was here we were strangers there. These were all men that looked like they had some dignity and some professionalism about them. But one of them hollers, and they all rush over there like a bunch of ants, and crowd in that corner. And then they move as these girls, and they continue the conversation, about their hips and their thighs and their breasts and they talk all this out so everybody can hear it.
Real intellectual move.
Yes, yeah. And then they kind of meander away from the window until they see some more coming down the street. And so this is the normal 5 to 5:30 activity at that place. Business goes down the drain because 5 to 5:30 is watch the traffic. We don't mean on the street, but on the sidewalk. Unbelievable.
Words go by, I tell you. Melody?
Oh, sure. Sure.
Well, not only the way they dress, their actions, the way they walk,
The movement,
the
talk,
movement,
the talk.
and this applies even to the males.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think this trend that's happening now where they have different colored hair, like pink hair, white hair, and part of it is shaved, and they have just a little part up here, and like we saw a fella the other day. I don't know if you all have seen this Boy George on television. I don't mean any of his concerts, but I mean just see his picture. You can't tell whether he's a boy or a girl the way he's dressed because of the way his hair is, and he wears makeup, and he wears male clothes. And but that's partially,
Yeah.
In other words, he is a male, and he's not trying to be a female, but that's his image, so to speak.
Right. His image is androgyny. He's
Right.
like CBS is having him with Jerry Falwell, talking about the pros and cons of losing your sexual identity and the movement toward androgyny.
But
Can you imagine Boy George and Jerry Falwell?
but in a sense, it's good. It's good because this guy doesn't care what he looks like.
No, that's right.
He
He wasn't serious about it when he started. It was a joke. It was a come on to get attention when he started dressing that way and making up that way. It was to be different. It was to get the camera. And now he's been forced to be serious.
But he isn't trying to dress to attract somebody sensually. He's trying to make a mark. Now, we're not saying we approve of this. Don't get us wrong.
It's not doing any harm.
But this is how some individuals are choosing to dress. The other day when we went over to see this movie that the retreat people are seeing now, we were waiting in line, and there was a fella who looked like Boy George to me. Of course, I've never seen the man except when they're interviewing him on the news, but he was dressed a lot like, just like you see a lot of Michael Jacksons as you walk down the street. And I thought at the time that this fella had the same hairdo that Boy George has, and he had the makeup on, and he had on an old corduroy jacket in 90-degree weather, and but yet he was more interested in being like Boy George than he was trying to be comfortable.
Right. Or he was also more interested in not being like the masses.
The masses. But yet he still had a hang-up because he was trying to be like somebody that other than himself. Because I don't think he would come up with that kind of way to dress on his own. He just didn't look like the type. Otherwise he wouldn't be, well, I think you know what I mean. He isn't right, but at least he isn't trying to dress in a sensuous way. Now, I think every one of you, and some of you more than others, have to fight off this sensuous feeling when you're dressing to go out on a task. Because I bet you a thought doesn't come into your mind, oh, do I look okay? You look in the mirror and you see if the blouse or the shirt fits just right, or the pants are they're not too tight. And why do you think those things? If you still don't have that in your mind, because you want to look good when you go out into the world, or you want to look good around here. Now, it doesn't mean we want all of you to go sloppy like Boy George, okay? What we're trying to make you realize is that it is a characteristic ingrained into the vehicle. And it's more so than in others, like Melody was talking about.
We couldn't believe that some of the people in 1984, when some of your classmates were applying for tasks, wanted the females, a prerequisite of the task, to wear skirts. instead of wearing pants. We couldn't believe that in 1984 they were still, to me, women's lib hasn't made any progress at all in areas like that, because to me, woman's lib is, I don't want to be a woman. If she wants to be woman's lib, what she really wants, it's like if the blacks want to eliminate prejudice, then they want to say, I don't want to be a black. It's not they want to be a white, but they don't want any racial consciousness. That's the only way you can overcome racial thinking, is to eliminate racial consciousness.
That's another thing.
Do you follow what we're saying? Yes, this is a very important point, because the organizations to promote black recognition are increasing the racial separation. Do you follow that? And they say they aren't, but yet they're always going out there. Say, don't you dare have a dance troupe where you don't have some blacks in it. But in the very same breath, they're opening a new dance troupe in Dallas that's an all-black dance troupe.
They ask for donations for an all-black college, but you can't have an all-white college, right?
Now these are the clumsy stages that the civilization goes through before they begin to realize that the only way they're going to eliminate that is to, I refuse to think race. I refuse to think sex. Of I'm a male, you're a female. I refuse to think that way. I'm a person. You're a person. And if I happen to be shaped a little different than you, that has nothing to do with my task or my place out there. You see
what color my skin is? In other words, the ones going to Houston, they could care less what color your skin is.
That's right.
What color your hair is, whether you have a lot of hair or you don't have any hair. Whether you have scars all over your face, whether you look like a monster, or whether you're the most beautiful person that ever walked. That you can't go to Houston with that kind of consciousness. Okay? Now that's advancement. If humans can think in that way, that's advancement.
Jesse Jackson, this is off the subject, is still very, very racist, because he's calling everybody racist. The only way he could not be racist is for race to never enter his conversation. That would be the only way he could begin to get over that hump. But he is so preoccupied with thinking that others are racists that he becomes the strongest racist of them all. It's very sad, and it's the same way with people who are so sexually minded about, like these feminists are going to cook their goose too if they go to that same extreme. But they ought to be wanting to eliminate, if their head's in the right place, they want to eliminate your thinking of male task, female task, and saying person task. And believe it or not, it tickles us to see these vehicles all doing these different tasks. Like I saw female garbage collectors. I've seen female climbing the telephone poles. Truck drivers on the highway working for the highway department. And you're seeing males in the jobs that were always traditionally thought of as female jobs. Now they're making a step in the right direction, but you want a big step backward, is to say you got to wear a skirt if you're going to be a female in my office. Or you've got to wear a business suit.
Or you've got to wear makeup.
Yes, or you've got to wear makeup.
Okay, what else? Anybody?
Give them some idea of what the workforce as something to look up to, and maybe what the human race could become. So they have a goal or reason to want to improve themselves.
Well, see, all of these things are going to be put down before they go to Houston. so they will have an idea of
We're
what
going to sort them all out, and we're going to
and
categorize.
all of them are going to be written down. You can't do it. If you don't want to do these things, then you can't go to Houston.
Is there some way to make them want to go to Houston? But
They'll all want to go to Houston.
When they see the list.
But when they see the list, they're going to say,
But-
oh, well, I'll do these first 10, but
Your
I'm sure
position,
they don't mean all of these.
your position has to be to
Right.
assume that they're all going to see the value of wanting to go to Houston.
It's like going on a diet. You don't eat any pie. Oh, they don't mean you can't have any pie. That means piece of pie every day or twice a day, lunch and dinner.